All right. Greetings, everybody. We're meeting with Peregrine Honig, who lives in Kansas City, but has been all over the place all the time and perpetually in motion. I don't know how many people remember you from watching work of art on TV. You were the it girl for a moment there, and I wanted to talk to you then, but I thought having more perspective and hopefully returning to sanity would be a good thing.
Thank you.
So, I mean, we all know you were the person who was supposed to have won, and you're the only real winner on the show, including some of the hosts. And so let's get some background, because I think, you know, you were raised differently than most people I know, and I wish maybe my kids were raised more like you or I was. But why don't we start there, and why don't we start in the beginning? Where were you born? How were you raised? What was it like? And how can you know, since you can't compare it to anything?
I was born in San Francisco, and my father lived in Project Garden, and my mother lived on 18th and Castro. And I grew up around, I think I grew up in kind of a revolutionary time, a mild revolution, but I think people were really questioning, you know, their sexuality and how to raise children. And I was really lucky in the sense that I was surrounded by a lot of creative people, and during a pretty experimental time in a big city that's actually a pretty small city. So I saw a lot of artwork. I was around a lot of people that were doing interesting things, and I also was raised at a time where a lot of people, you know, were getting sick and dying of AIDS. So it was kind of a celebratory time, and also there were, you know, big pockets of grief where I lost people in my neighborhood. When I think it made me the person who I am today. So I'm pretty happy with who I am today. And I think it just has given me, I think everybody has a different perspective on things. And I think as artists, we are kind of given ourselves, we give ourselves the space and time to generate things and do things with our personal experience and experiences.
I think that's good. When did you realize you were an artist? Or was it always a given?
I have always believed that I was an artist, and I as long as I always say that I knew that I was an artist before I knew that I was a child. I was a compulsive drawer, and even when I was 3 and 4, people, I was being studied by a woman named Constance Milbrath, who put together a book about talented children. So I've always kind of been watched, and I've always wanted my work to be published in one way or another. So I have always strived towards seeing my work in print. And, you know, as I've gotten older, I like to see my work in different mediums. I like to see my work included in blogs and those sorts of things.
Where did you go to art school?
I went to the Kansas City Art Institute, and I thought I was moving to, I'd never been to the Midwest, so I thought I was moving to fields of wheat and barns, and my grandparents were on the East Coast, so we would just kind of fly over the Midwest for, you know, family holidays, and I was surprised. I like the Midwest. I really like Kansas City. I find it to be a really interesting place to live and make my work.
It is a really interesting place. Somebody once said Kansas City is the easternmost American city that looks west. And I thought that was, you know, because Kansas City is in the west. And they define St. Louis as the westernmost city that looks east. And I think St. Louis is an eastern city as well as a southern city. But, you know, yeah. Kansas City is, everything's up to date in Kansas City. You know, it's kind of a modern place. Did you go to graduate school at the Kansas City Art Institute? So you did not.
Nope, I didn't even quite graduate from. I don't have an undergrad degree. I didn't quite make it. Yeah, I had some stuff to do.
All right, well, let's talk about that for a moment. Do you think having an undergraduate degree would make any difference to your life?
Not now.
Do you think having a graduate degree would make any difference, or would have?
I think I would. I think there are some circles where there's a kind of a pride of just not really having that academic armor, and I think there are some circles that I travel in where I know that I would stand a little bit taller if I had like a more linear education. So sometimes I feel like I would like a degree from an Ivy League school. Sometimes I'm proud to be in the group of people that don't even have an undergraduate degree. Like, I have academic training, and I'm so glad that I went to the Art Institute. But graduate school was not the next step for me immediately. And I had opportunities actually in Chicago. So I went out to Chicago to print with Landfall Press. And I'm really glad that I made that choice, because that's the piece that got me into the Whitney. So that my path is a little bit different. I've taught academically, and teaching is not my favorite thing to do. I like to teach workshops, but I think that it's a lot easier to get a teaching degree if you have a graduate master's degree.
Oh yeah, definitely agreed. All right, let's talk about some of these things that have worked. First of all, what did you major in?
I was mostly in sculpture, and I spent a lot of time in printmaking, but I kept my studio in painting.
What do you like about printmaking?
I like that it's democratic in a weird way. You can sort of make a lot of one thing. I like the tactility of it and the kind of alchemy that is printmaking. How
many mediums do you?
Huh?
What do you print? Are you doing mostly lithographs?
My newest print, I like etchings a lot. I like lithography a lot. I like that with my printmaking, it kind of gives a commercial veil to some of the ideas that I'm playing with. So it can soften the blow really easily when I'm doing something that might have a subversive undertone.
That happens periodically with you. Do you feel like printmaking for you is less formal?
Oh, it's more formal. It's way more formal.
No, I mean more casual in terms of the expression of ideas.
No, it's so, I feel like with I draw a lot and I paint a lot, but when I do printmaking, it's almost the thing that I've really considered for long periods of time, and I've really planned out how I want them to be, and it's probably my most structured way of working.
Interesting, because I didn't get that by looking at work. Okay, I mean I can see it, but I didn't get it. All right, so now let's talk about these career steps. So you graduated from the Kansas City Art Institute, then how long? No,
I didn't graduate.
You finished. You finished at the Kansas City. You stopped, and then you went to work at Landfall Press in Chicago directly.
Yes.
Did you move to Chicago?
No. They flew me out there, and I worked on my first print with them. It was Ovibat or Avibat, and it was a series. Jack Lemmon had seen Melissa Roundtree had seen my work in New York at an alternative fair through the
Wait a minute, Melissa was with Hallmark?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That took me. All right, so Hallmark's in Kansas City. Melissa was a curator from Hallmark. Hallmark used to buy a lot of art. Do they still?
I'm not sure actually. I know that she was the fine arts buyer. So,
Right.
and she obviously couldn't buy my work. So
She was buying work from Jack Landfall Press. Jack Lemmon was the master printer and owner of Landfall. She liked your work. She said, Jack, you should see this awesome printmaker in Kansas City.
You should see this awesome drawer. You should see these
okay.
you can draw. This guy can draw. So, yeah, so Melissa introduced me to Jack Lemmon, and then she saw my work, and then he flew me out to Chicago, and then he showed that piece at Navy Pier, and yeah, David Keel it was very inexpensive for any art fair, I guess, and then David Keel bought it and for the Whitney, and then after that I set up to Chicago to the fair, and everybody was sort of quiet, and they said, hey, you sold your piece. And I said, oh, great. I was surprised they sold anything. And yeah, they sold it to Whitney. And so that kind of changed my life really quickly, because then all these other museums bought the work. And also, ironically.
Wait, we'll get to that. How did the other museums know about the Whitney having purchased something?
I think it just got around. I know that my dealer, the man who would become my dealer in Kansas City, I had approached him multiple times in Kansas City, like shown him my work, and he was walking around the fair, and he had found out that piece had sold, and he didn't even put my name and the work together, and he bought the piece. So I don't know who told who, but just like a lot of times, people want to leave their city to go to the fairs to buy it.
Right.
So, yeah, so by the time I got back to Kansas City, I got back on the 4th of July. And by the time I got to Kansas City, I think Melissa had told other people, so it was just known.
Okay, cool. And then somehow, how did this get you in the biennial? Or did
I was in the biennial.
Okay. No, I did. Okay, cool. So then, when was this?
1998, I think.
Okay. I'm trying to remember when we met. I remember where. I don't remember how many years ago.
Last time we met, it was at the swimming pool. It
right.
was, Alicia and I had curated that show about video. But I met you in Chicago at an art fair at the Armory. Oh, and also, where I think I met you? I think I met you at the Stray Show, because I had curated the gun and knife show with Marcus Kane, and I think that's where I met you. A show about weaponry and stuff like that. So that's where I think I met you.
I don't remember that.
Okay.
Then you did this TV show. How did that happen? What did this do to you? Do you wish it continued, or do you wish it went away? Or I have so many questions. What expectations you didn't have too many expectations that you talk.
My expectations? I was already in Miami when I found out about. I was already headed to Miami for my business, for my shop, when I found out about the auditions, and I think I knew it was a big deal first when I saw Simone de Perrier at the panel, and then I had gone to New York for something, and I had met with Larissa Goldston, and she was like, oh, can you believe it? There's going to be this crazy television show, and I think Jerry Saltz is going to be on it. And as soon as I knew Jerry Saltz was going to be on it, it was like, I was way more worried and really relieved, because there would be a legitimacy to it. Whatever happened, something interesting was going to happen. And I'd always told my husband, like, well, if there's ever a reality TV show about art, I'm making artwork about pop culture. I'm never going to be like any other kind of celebrity. I'm not an actor. But I would like to know what it would be like to be on the other side of the wall. You know, like, I think it's good for artists to curate. I thought if I'm going to make artwork about pop culture, I should have a sense of the experience of it in a weird way. So I just auditioned, and my audition went fine. And then I auditioned in LA. It was super abstract experience. And yeah, you know, it's the weirdest thing. You know, you don't have any natural light, and there's no music, and there's no books, there's no internet. So I wouldn't have auditioned for a second season because I really knew the first season was going to be interesting. And so I'm really glad I did it. I learned a lot about videography. I learned a lot about myself. And I don't know, I don't think that I really messed up. And that was my big fear. I just didn't want to mess up. And so, you know, my husband had to lie. He had to sign a contract that if he said that I was in a reality TV show, he would be sued for $1 million. But, you know, I regularly communicate with Jerry Phelps, who I've always respected. I'm friends with 3 of the people on the show, and it was a very real thing for me. And it was, you know, it's kind of like that once in a lifetime experience.
Or maybe more rare. Okay, so then what's been fallout since then?
Let's see. Being on TV is people recognize you, and they believe in you in a way that is really fanatical and kind of fantastic. You have this temporary power that you can say that you're going to do something, and it's almost like because you've been on TV, it's believable, like you're going to do it. So I had a lot of opportunities to do really odd things. I was invited to costume some dance performances. I was invited to do a lot of lectures all over the place. I got into different residencies easily. So even though it was kind of a mid-brow thing, I think there were a lot of people who you think, oh, they're too highbrow, like they're not going to respect me for doing this. I think a lot of people in the art world, I don't think that they thought it was really an honest art making situation, but I do think it was something that it didn't demean me, and it might have elevated me enough to be recognized in a weird abstract way.
Does that continue still?
Oh yeah, yes. Yeah, but because people don't realize that it's not, okay, so the season is over in America, but then it goes on to Taiwan, and then it goes on to Sweden. Right now it's in Canada, so, or whatever. Like, you all know where the first season of Work of Art is airing based on how many Facebook requests I get from some really weird place. So I'll get all these requests from Russia. You know, I can't read Russian. I don't know, but like, so it doesn't end. It's a really long thing, and I was not aware of that. And I think that is, you know, I was in South America a couple of years ago, and it had just aired in South America, so I was recognized in South America, and that's interesting because you think, oh, I did this really American thing in America, but the truth is, it keeps moving. You know, it keeps generating. So
it's kind of scary.
It is really scary. Yeah, it's super weird. Yeah, you sign your life away, you sign your privacy away to strangers, and you just kind of have to, you know, see where it goes.
Yeah, you talked about having a shop. I find this an interesting balancing or counterpoint to an art career. Talk about it for a sec.
I have a lingerie shop, and it will be 11 years old on February 14th. And because
that's Valentine's Day.
I opened on Valentine's Day. Thank you.
I almost said Groundhog's Day, but I got it right. Okay.
So I had taught, and I wasn't that interested in teaching semester to semester, and I liked curating, and I liked showing work, and I liked making my work, and I realized that owning my shop, and owning a shop might be the thing that would allow me to own my own time. And so I opened it, and I thought it was going to be more of this temporary performative thing in this small space, and it just took off. And it's nice. Like sometimes when my work is doing really well, when I sell a lot of work, my store can be a little bit tight, and then vice versa. Sometimes when my store is doing great, it can allow me to buy higher quality art supplies and you know, treat myself to more time, because as artists, that's just really all we want, is more time to make our work. So the store has really allowed me to make more work and spend more time in my studio. I don't really get sabbatical from my store, but it's a, you know, owning a lingerie store, it's kind of a window into a really interesting world. And my work is primarily about women and the figure and the human body. And I just have such, you know, it's like you talk about putting your 10,000 hours in. I feel like, I know I've seen 10,000 naked women at this point. And so, you know, everybody tells a story, everybody tells a story. And yeah, at first I used to try and keep them really separate. Like, this is my art life, this is my store life, but they inform each other. And I become really comfortable with that.
Where does most of your content for your art come from? Some of it's clearly coming from the store.
Coming from, you know, right now I was in Argentina for about 6 weeks last year, and I was really kind of influenced by the Mothers of the Plaza who were protesting, and just this idea of required DNA and this idea of artists being killed so recently, and just this idea of killing artists, and because they would breed non-subservience, that artists were almost like animals, and if we, as artists, if we actually were if our children were more likely to become artists genetically, or if it was a nature versus nurture thing. So right now I'm making a lot of artwork about like animals breastfeeding human children but wearing masks to avoid imprinting, and women wearing animal masks and breastfeeding animals to avoid imprinting. And so yeah, I really you know, I'm influenced by where I travel to, and I'm influenced by what I read, obviously. I'm influenced by the decorative arts and invention. I love how art and invention are connected to one another. You know, I just came back from Venice. I was lucky enough to be able to be at the Biennale. I mean, just, you know, costuming culture, things like that. And of course, like, my business is lace, and lace is something that weaves in and out of my art and imagery. It's one of those weird, super evocative and neutral things. Like, when you're born, you know, when you're christened, you're supposed to wear lace. When you get married, you're supposed to wear lace. When you die, you know, lace is everywhere. So lace is just something that's really interesting to me. And owning a lingerie store, I have like infinite access to lace. So these are the things that do influence me and tie into one another, if that makes sense. Make sense? I know.
No, it does make sense. But they're killing artists in Argentina. Is that what I heard you say?
Yeah, they're oh, it's so terrible. It was like in 19, I think it was like up into the late 70s. It's there were so many artists that were killed that they just were called the disappeared. And so there's a group of people who are now at my age, in their 30s, and they're the children of artists or non-cooperative people, and their mothers were detained until they gave birth, and then the mothers were killed, and then those children were given to these military families as gifts. So it was, I don't think I had been in a culture where something had happened that recently. It was really, and especially to see women protesting and trying to find out if their grandchildren were alive, and those grandchildren would have been my age. I went to Argentina thinking, oh, I'm going to the Paris of South America, I'm going to have such a good time. And it was actually, I went to Ace Project, a residency out there, and it felt, you know, it's interesting to be in a culture where artists have been oppressed, and it made me really think about who I was. It made me think about being a woman and being an artist, and what it was to be a mother who was an artist, what it was not to be a woman and decide not to have children. It had a really intense effect on my practice.
I would guess. Is there evidence of this continuing at all? I mean, I hear residual attitudes. I don't hear that this is a government policy anymore.
It's not happening now. It's just you know, I don't know, what is it, pebble in the water situation.
Yeah, right.
I don't think artists are being killed right now. My best friend is a violinist, and she plays with Charlie Garcia, who had a huge hand in sort of making music and exposing some of these situations to the public. I was just amazed at how little I knew. I mean, I felt so ignorant, and who wants to feel ignorant when they show up to a place, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So and so for me, it was a real learning experience. And you know, when you ask me where, you know, what influences my work, you know, humility. You know, learning about what I know nothing about can be really inspiring. I think sometimes people think that inspiration is always like this beautiful, wonderful thing, but I think inspiration can also be really humbling. It can be something that forces your hand because you haven't taken the time to recognize what you're doing or realize what you should be doing if you're thinking a certain way about, you know, things.
Right. How much do you think you're driving your career?
You know, I've definitely taken an unconventional path, and I probably have had to work harder because I have wanted to maintain control over certain aspects of myself and my creative identity. And also my fear of just being a flash in the pan is pretty intense. So I think I have a really big hand in curating myself into situations and deciding where I want my work to go. You know, for me, in the past, it's depressing, but in the past like 5 years, you know, I've had 6 dealers die or close, or it's you know, I mean, I've had great dealers, and so right now I'm in a place of finding where I want to show next, and in and out of the country. But you know, it's always been interesting for me. My work is I feel it's real. I make it, and I find that I have a really healthy relationship with writers. I'm really interested in what writers have to say about my work, because when the show is over, all that's left are the postcards and the reviews of what was on the wall or in the space. Right. So, you know, I have a really interesting relationship with Alicia Eller. She's a writer out of Chicago, and we've been working together since I met her. She was young, and I have a healthy relationship with, you know, Kate Hackman and Mike Miller and you know, Jerry Saltz. I feel like they're my, yes, it's important to have artists in your studio, and I have incredible friends who will be honest with me and critique me, but the way that writers see things and the way that artists see things is very different. And so I think in some ways I've driven my career because it's really important for me to get a review, and not because I think it's going to sell the work, but because I want to hear what somebody has to say about my work. And you know, you can have so many galleries, but a gallery can only host your work so often. So between solo shows, it's, you know, you can be in group shows, but what's it going to be for your work to be the piece that's most considered? And that doesn't mean that the work that sells. It means the work that is considered within the context of the other work in space. So that's important to me, and I know that the dealers that I've worked with have appreciated that, like my fortitude in that. But I don't feel like I am very, you know, I think making money in the art world is like the older you get, the more things that you're able to say no to. I think that's true of a lot of things. But I don't know. I really like to make my work, and obviously I'm willing to make my work on TV and be like under surveillance for 20 hours a day. But that's nothing that one of my art dealers could ask me to do. I mean, a lot of them steered me away from doing that. But, you know, by the time they were like, oh, is that a good idea? It had already been filmed.
That's been weird. How do you think writers and artists see differently?
Well, I can look over somebody who like the way that I edit a writer's paper is going to be different than how another writer edits their paper. Like the way an artist might come into my studio and talk to me about my work is going to be maybe more like how they would do it physically with their hands, where I have a different way of thinking about my work when a writer comes into my work into my studio, because they're not necessarily going to say, oh, I would make it this way. It's easier for me to have a conversation about concept and content, and even materiality sometimes with, you know, I really let very few artists into my studio, probably because it's intimidating, where I think, at least for me, letting artists into my studio and having an ongoing dialogue versus artists versus writers, you know, I'm not always influenced by contemporary art. I am often more influenced by what I've read. So maybe that's why that I want to be intelligent. I want to be knowledgeable about things, and it's just a different medium.
No, I get what you're saying. It's interesting. I don't know if I had thought about it that way. How much do you write?
A lot. I write every day. if I'm going to, and it's much harder for me to write than make work. Like, or good work, even harder than both. But I always make my artwork. Like, I always make my art. Like, I'm always making art. I make art every day. And I write a lot. It's really hard for me to write because I want my writing to seem like my line. Like, it didn't take much of an effort for me to get this idea out of me. But for me to get to a place of writing a curatorial statement or getting to a place to explain what my work is about, you know, I struggle and it's hard and it's exhausting, and I really respect writers for that reason. It's uncomfortable for me. So for me to do something that is so uncomfortable, it makes me feel like I'm working really hard, and it makes me feel like I'm learning something. So I write every day, but I would say very little of my writing is actually possible.
Let's see if some people have some questions. You guys raise your hands if you do. Are you writing a journal or are you writing for consumption?
I'm writing for consumption, and I'm writing for, you know, I put language into my artwork when it's right, when it feels good. So consumption.
I wonder what it would be like, I don't know, keeping a journal and writing that. I wonder how much difference. I don't do that. You know, I write a fair amount, but I don't write for me. I write for others, and I wonder what it would be like to write for myself. I wonder if the things that get the most attention in an exhibit don't have to do a lot with the medium and the scale, as opposed to the content.
Well,
or how it's expressed.
Well, it's also how it's curated. Like, it's where it goes in the room. Like,
yeah,
you can easily walk by a massive painting if it's in the wrong spot. You know, you can, you know, my work, like, you know, my biggest work to date are these big golf carts that like rolled around the Nelson Atkins Museum and look sort of like Mardi Gras floats, and they're, you know, laser cut steel with like Cote d'Ivoire glass, and they're super decorative. And when older people were in it, they kind of looked like these weird, like, chariots. You know, they got a lot of attention, but they still had maintained this kind of subtlety where people didn't realize that they were newer objects. They still, you know, making something look a bit antiquated or using an older medium can make it easier for people to digest something. And I don't know why that is, but in my work, at least, I like to play with medium and how people are affected by the materiality of something. Like, how should we, you know, see a silver point versus a huge digital print that has always lived digitally going to be different.
Yep. Okay. Sam, go ahead.
Thank you for speaking to us here again. I had a question about how you write about your work. Your work is all, and it's also political and about culture, and it's romantic and has kind of an old world feel.
Thank you.
But contemporary. So when you write about your work, do you think about how to balance all of those descriptors, or do you try to write about your work in a way that's romantic? Do you think about that?
I do, and it's interesting. That's a really good word. I really want my writing to be accessible, and I really don't want people to feel like they're being talked down to. And maybe romantic is the perfect word, because I want people to fall in love with my ideas, right? Because I'm in love with my own ideas. I think all artists are. if they're good artists, they're going to be in love with their own ideas. Like, if you're not in love with your ideas, then you're not going to be able to make interesting work. So, same with curating. Like, if you're not in love with the other artist's work, if you're not in love with the idea of talking about their work and explaining their work, then you're not a good partner. You know, you're not being generous. You're just taking. So, when it comes to writing about art or even writing about my own work, I think it's really important that I'm explaining something. I don't want to push people away. I want them to feel like they're invited to sit at the table with me, and I feel that sometimes I am in the middle of making my work, in my studio, and writing allows me to get to the next step without being false or subversive for no reason. Like, oh, I'm going to make this stupid and dirty and funny. Like, sometimes writing can keep me from just, I don't know, making something goofy just because I can. Then it makes me take myself seriously. And I think it's important to have that way to be at peace with trying to sound intelligent.
That's really interesting. Good question, Sam. You got more to say, Sam?
No, that was great. Thank you. That helps me write about my own work, so I appreciate it.
How so? How does it help you, Sam?
Because I'm serious about my content, but I have a sense of humor, and but I don't want to be ironic. So in writing my work, there's always that. It's not a tightrope. It's that I'm sincere, and I want the writing to be beautiful, but describe the work. So, and I understand that stopping when you're working and writing so that you don't betray yourself in a way and start pretending or get carried away with. I can get carried away with, I don't know, wanting to lighten it up. So it helps me get really clear, and then and stick with the work in a way.
It sounds like both of you are saying that writing keeps your artwork more serious.
No, it just can keep it on track.
Yeah.
Okay. You also said that you wanted your writing to be accessible, Peregrine.
Yeah.
Do you have different objectives for your art than for your writing?
Not really. I mean, I really want. I'm not saying that I dumb down my work, but I know that my work is meant to be seen, and so I kind of like you're saying, like, you don't write for yourself. I make my work because I have to make my work, but it's not an ongoing diary. Of course, it's influenced by what's going on in my life and where I'm living and all those things. But when accessible, it just means that my point is not to confuse people. And part of at least what seems to be my hand so far in my life is that I start off at a place where I invite people into my work. People are invited to see my work. And my aesthetic, what makes, me shift in my space and feel fantastic is when something happens that's quiet and elegant and just can really sucker punch you. So it's not that I'm trying to make it easy or soft. It's just that in order for the ideas that I'm playing with to get across, even to me, it often has to be produced in a way that is accessible, that is even familiar, even if you've never seen it before.
Are there multiple dialogues going on while you're making the art?
Yes.
I wonder if that's true for most artists.
I would hope so. I mean, otherwise, I mean, I think I would be jealous of anybody that could wake up, go to studio, and make one thing without being distracted. I mean, distraction is part of my studio practice.
Yeah, for sure. I think art, I mean, I sense that there's a whole lot of discovery in your art making process, and that you get a lot, you're educated in self-discovery, etc., by making your art, yes?
Yes. I mean, I make a lot of work and I throw a lot of work away. Like I'm a fierce editor. Like I get rid of a lot of work. And what I decide to show or leave that private space and become public is very considered. I mean, it's, you know, and sometimes I feel like I'm minimalist because I'm making enough work that it really is the line, and so much of that quality that I'm going for that it only succeeds in certain drawings, certain paintings, certain sculptures.
Yeah, you have high standards.
Yeah, I have high standards. It's my standard, but it's high, you know.
I agree. Let's see what Ellen has to say. Go ahead, Ellen.
Well, thanks a lot, Paul. It's been so interesting listening to you, Peregrine. So I just want to say that I agree with what you were saying about writing. I don't really write about my work, but it sounds to me like what you and I forget who else was saying was that writing helps keep your work honest, or helps keep yourself honest about what you're doing. I mean, that's how I feel when I speak to people. I don't write about my work, but I love speaking about my work to other artists. And I think that performs that function for me. It helps keep me honest about what I'm trying to do. It's so interesting to have this conversation with everyone. It's very, makes me feel really part of it.
Do you think it's also because it's grounding? When you talk about your work to somebody else, do you think that it's also something where you're giving yourself to that person and just hearing yourself say to that person, and in that way, it's almost like alchemy, like it becomes true, so that when you return to your studio, those things that you've discussed with other people and other artists, they feel more solid? Because I feel that way.
I think so. I mean, I think when I'm speaking to someone else, sometimes I'm articulating something about my work that hasn't happened before, that I haven't articulated yet. So it makes it more concrete for me, and it makes me more comfortable about pursuing it.
Yeah, it makes you braver, right?
I'm sorry?
Like it makes you braver. It makes you feel great.
Because now I've said it, it has some life to it. So,
right.
and I get that from speaking with the other artists, and that's why I like being in the, being able to do that. So it's great that you can do that with the writing. Really.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that it makes you braver, though. I think it's sort of like when you're doing it yourself, one-on-one, you and your art, it's like an indulgence. And it's a dialogue between you and the work of art. When you take it out into the world as a result of speaking about it or by writing about it, it makes it more tangible. It makes it more real. It brings it into existence, and I think makes you be more responsible.
Yeah. And you're also
responsible. Yeah. You're held accountable for what you said.
Yeah. I mean, I haven't thought about this, Peregrine, until you brought it up, and I find it interesting. And I'm seeing a lot of other people's comments, and they like it also. It's interesting. Sam, your hand is still up. John, go ahead.
Thank you.
Hi, Peregrine. I've really enjoyed the discussion. You just were talking about distractions in the studio in the process. Have you ever heard of Brian Eno's oblique strategies?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I find that there's actually something really useful in channeling that distraction and all that into the process.
Yeah, he's a totally awesome nerd. Yeah, that's, any artist, like, I love those lists of, like, Henry Miller has a good list, has a good list. Like, everybody that makes good things, like, there's a list. Like, I've never written my own list down, but, like,
a list of what?
like the nerdy things that you should do to get to your work. I don't know, like, I feel like people get kind of tied into this, like, reasonings as to why they're not making their work. Like, oh, I don't really believe in creative blocks. The creative blocks are part of the process. And I think most creative people that I know, musicians, artists, writers, performers, you're not making work if you can wake up every morning and just make what's in your mind. There's something wrong with you if that's happening. And I think part of the process, you know, is being able to fall down and stand back up again and realize that part of making the work is falling down. You know, and geeking out a little.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So now I'm sitting here wrestling with Chuck Close's statement about inspiration is for amateurs. The rest of us just show up and get to work.
Well, get to studio. I mean, you have to be in studio. It doesn't even mean that you are making your work. It just means around the things and your tools and all the stuff that you use to make your work. And it's like you're not going to walk into your studio and make good art. I mean, I have a studio right now. It probably took me 4 years to really be comfortable enough to make work inside of that space. You know, residencies can run the gambit. Like, you can show up to a place, you can be perfectly comfortable and ready to make your work. But you know, I have a pretty high threshold for making my work. I can show up to a place and make my work. I like to make my work. But you know, some people, it's you know, it's like this earlier conversation about romance. Like, you are the first person to see your work. You're the first person. You're in the front row. So you are deciding everything. And so sometimes those decisions can be really stressful. And in order to make those decisions, you actually at least have to be sitting in the seat. You know, you have to be there. You have to be present. And it's, you know, it can be exhausting. It can be exhilarating. But if you're not sitting in the seat, then nothing good is going to come of it.
That's true. Okay, Tanya, your turn. Go ahead, Tanya.
I love your work and just love you, and thank you. So I wanted to throw something out, and I'm really interested in what you think about this. And this conversation about writing about work and talking about work. I've always been a little hesitant about it for this reason. I'm not a writer. And although I write, but I write for myself, so it's not for consumption. It's really for my own sense of clarity and to move myself forward. Mm-hmm. But I've thought about it in the sense that if I were to read a poem, for instance, by E.E. Cummings, and then he said, now let me tell you what this poem is about, it would destroy it for me. And sometimes I feel like I make a piece of sculpture because I'm not a writer, because I don't want to take your experience of the reason I make sculpture is because I'm not a writer or I'm not a poet. And so I'm asking kind of an open-ended question about that.
Man, congratulations. I mean, for real, like, if that's not part of your deal, I can tell you, I mean, I can name names of 10 artists whose work I like who have ruined their work for me by talking about their work. Like, if it's not your path and it feels unnatural, then totally don't do it. It's not a requirement by any means. I mean, I can also say, on the flip side of it, you know, I recently experienced something that was really well written about and really well talked about, and I went to experience it, and I was really disappointed. So it's a veil, it's just a layer, you know. I mean, I see people who get grants for things that I can't stand, and I see people who, if they were only able to just play that linguistic game a little bit better, maybe they would have more opportunities. So it's all checks and balances. It's not a black and white situation. For me, writing is almost like a gray area. Like, I don't consider myself to be a writer. So the title, when I'm not burdened by the title, like I'm a writer, I have to write every day, I have to write for the people, a political writer. I am an artist, so it's almost just like another room for me to move into when it's the time for me to write. You know, do you cook? Do you have a glass of wine? Like, there are other things that have titles. Like, you might go cook a really delicious meal, but you're not burdened by, oh, I'm a cook. Like, I have to make this amazing meal. It's just something creative to do that kind of fuels that other part of you. And for me, writing is that thing for me. It's just a sidetrack with a continuum. Like, it's not like it's not like I'm going, you know, I don't know. It's like when we go have a coffee. It's like I go have a coffee with my brain. It's like that. Does that make sense? But you shouldn't feel like you have to write in order to make your work. Writing might have nothing to do with your work, and that's fine too. I mean, this conversation just started naturally, and my relationships with writers, it's really based on respect and interest and curiosity, which is all that we are doing anyway, is, you know, looking around in the dark for what we don't know.
All good, Tanya?
That's good.
Okay, cool. Where to go? Kunal, go ahead, Kunal.
Hi. First of all, it's a wonderful discussion. Thank you very much. My question is, sometimes as a visual artist, I feel certain things can be better said in words. And so what do you feel about mixing writing with visual arts?
I do that. I have words in my work when it's appropriate, and I think people can get a little bit too text heavy when they don't really know the next layer, or they're nervous that people are not going to understand what their work is about. But I feel like if it's the right thing to do with your work, you should do it.
Okay.
Like, yeah, I mean, if it feels right to put language in your work, then you should do it. If it feels like you should write about what you're doing, and for yourself or for other people, that's important.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
You're welcome. That was easy.
Lucky too.
Question.
Kunal's a nice guy. He doesn't ask the really. He doesn't ask the hard questions. He lets me do that, or the embarrassing ones. He's a better man. All right, April. What do you think? Where's April? What do you think about writing, April?
Well, I think that writing is a great thing, and I spend a lot of time writing about my work. It helps me to understand what it is I'm saying and where it comes from, what it means. And I very rarely make pieces of art that don't have text either on them or a text that accompanies the work. So I do a lot of writing, no question about that.
It's important.
Yeah, for me, it's very important.
It's important. I mean, I think I really feel like, you know, when people they have something that's untitled, you know, like, oh, their work is untitled. Like, is there a bigger way of titling your work than untitling it? Like, that's got to be the biggest title ever, is untitled. Like, that is like, it drives me crazy for some reason.
Yeah, I love them, and I also love really long titles on pieces. Just go and go and go and add more and more words to my titles. Yeah. It's just so interesting to do that.
Yeah, it's fun.
You know, different artists do different things. I remember Stanley Boxer's titles, who would have really long titles with no spaces between the words.
Right. Yeah. Why not? Right.
That was really challenging for me, but it was memorable. I think it was Pete Volkas who said, you know, if you can't make good art, at least have good titles.
Yeah, that's a good quote.
Yeah,
I'm going to write that down.
I made the spaces, though. I like the spaces.
That helps the reader. Anybody else have any questions or comments you want to throw in before we wrap this up? I feel like we have a really good conversation going, and we should continue it.
Yeah,
But
bring it. I'm wide awake. I'm nice. I don't bite.
That's not getting us any hands, though.
Oh, maybe I should say mean things and I get more questions.
All right, so I have a question about media. I mean, I feel like you're pretty free-form and comfortable working in almost any material. Is that accurate?
I think so. Thank you. Yeah.
And I
mean, I feel, here's what I feel. This is what I think. I think certain things are meant to be in certain mediums. So the reason that you say that, and I take that as a compliment, is that I really consider what something is supposed to end up being in. Some things are supposed to be photographs, some things are supposed to be paintings, some things are supposed to be sculptures. It just really depends on what it's about.
I agree. Sam, did you want to say something more? Your hand is up. Go ahead, Sam.
About that. So, Peregrine, sometimes when you make a drawing or a print, you then start thinking about a space outside of the drawing and feel pulled to make a sculpture, and then activating that space between those two things.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, it really, like, my prints are often my most reduced ideas, like my most considered drawings, and my sculptures are things that, I mean, they take a very long time and a lot of money. So it's, and, you know, in terms of photography, sometimes I will pay somebody to document something, and I will look at the documentation and I will realize that, I don't know, that the photograph is more interesting than the object, and that the art is the photograph. And same with like printmaking, where you're making a print and you realize that the stencils are more interesting than the print. Like, those things just happen. Sometimes it's such a nice surprise. Like, oh, there it is, you know, woo! And then sometimes, for me, I often work very large and then go down to a smaller scale. Like, a lot of people sketch and then they get bigger, but most of the time when I make my smaller work, it's reduced down from a much larger piece. You know.
I'm curious about another thing. I'm curious about another thing that relates to that was in the TV show, and that's time. I mean, in the TV show, you would frequently have 24 hours, maybe 48 hours to conceive and execute and finish a work of art, which for you,
that was real.
For you, that seems like a really tough constraint.
Well, you just don't have any of the things that you have to distract you. Like, if you just, it's just not an option. And I don't think that I was like the second best artist in the group of people that I was thrown together with, but I was the person that was least resistant having no distractions. Like we all love our distractions. Like we love our, you know, our coffee, our pets, our take a walk around the block, our Facebook, all these little sweet little things that we do throughout the day. But when you don't have any of those things, your hand is kind of forced. And I really I would say these are the materials that I need. And, you know, honestly, Paul, a lot of the work that I made, they were almost like props of my art. They were things that once I started to realize the medium that I was working in, that the final material in my artwork that was the TV, was like, that was the medium, that was the frame of what I was going to be making. And once I could wrap my head around that, then I started to not really worry so much about it. You know, they were my ideas. They were things that I made really quickly that I knew would just hold up and spontaneously in that moment. But I think anybody that's here in this forum could take a whole lot of material, think about something briefly, and make something and say, this is what I was thinking about when I made this thing. And there really, it wasn't like, it was up for a month, and somebody like you is going to come around and be like, well, that's not really what it is. Like, like there was no context. So that kind of distraction of, oh, how is this work going to be considered among my peers? How is this work going to be considered among, you know, the writers that are going to come into the gallery? None of those things were concerned because it was a completely abstract reality. It was in a bubble. And I think most artists, when placed in a bubble, will either start trying to get out of the bubble or just be complacent and make art. You know, it just is how you are in the playground, sort of, how you are in your studio. So
I got it. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
I like that. Okay. I learned something. Tamara, maybe this is the last question. Go ahead.
I
was very interested when you said that you start big and then go smaller. Can you explain it? Do you start like in space and then go into? I'm really curious. It's sort of a puzzling thing. Yeah.
Well, like I'll make a really big, ugly painting that I never want to see ever again. And then, like one of my favorite, I was making these really large paintings of Mary Kate and Ashley Olsen. And then I was so interested in them as these cultural icons, and I was working with them, and I was doing these paintings, and I wasn't really thinking about color. I was just kind of making these life-size versions of them in my studio, almost like a prop, right? And so then I realized that I wanted more of them. So I made, and this was a while back, like 2008. And so I made these, I went online and I found these like stadium cups, you know, like those tiger cups that you can drink out of. And so I ended up making 400 of these Mary Kate, well, they're two sets. So 200 Mary Kates and 200 Ashleys. And then just like giving them to people during Mardi Gras in Kansas City, like these cups. And so, like, I love these things. I think they're fantastic, and I love that they have this kind of Coca-Cola font, and I love that they were sent, you know, printed in China and brought back to me, and that the completed image of these cups is like people being drunk and drinking out of these naked little girls with these Coca-Cola fonts. But in order to make those pieces, I had to make this really large-scale painting and reduce the line until it was that very kind of commercial line that I think only succeeds on a commercial object. You know, sometimes I do a painting that's beautiful, that I like, that I want to live with, but these were just oily, greasy, gross sketches, you know? And in order to get the line down, I had to make a very big line. So I had to see them for what they were. And I think there is that transition where a lot of people sketch, and then they do a quick sculpture to make a bigger thing. But for me, I like things at different scales. So to make the cups, I had to go big.
I got it. That's cool. I think I muted Tamara so I didn't have the echo. Tamara, we're all good?
So those cups did you make? They're all the same or different?
I painted every one of the cups, so they're all a little bit different.
Wow.
But, you know, I had a show with Zola Lieberman once, and my dealer in Kansas City kept giving me, like, attitude about making bigger artwork, and I actually got really angry, and I made shrinky dinks. So I had this huge gallery with these tiny pictures. I like them. They're funny. I worked on them forever, just forever. But I kind of turned it out like these almost like Indian miniatures of my drawings. So I started small, and then they shrunk down, so there are these very detailed shrinky things.
It almost feels like it gets more precise when you shrink them. Like the smaller you work, the more precise you get. Okay. Well, thanks. That was cool. Thanks.
Yeah, sure.
Cool. Peregrine, let's wrap this up. You know, people are writing comments like, I'm so inspired by this conversation, I have to get to the studio.
Hey!
Somebody else says, I second that. So, you know, here we are doing, these people are, well, some are west of you, some are east of you. But, you know, I mean, what you are doing is you're creating sleeplessness for artists. And for that, I thank you, and I appreciate all that you've shared. It's been really, really great. You've been wonderful. I've unmuted everybody. Peregrine, thanks so much.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you. Very interesting. Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Jennifer.
All right. Good night.
Good night.